Just about to start. Give me 10 seconds. It should be posted in Facebook now. So, okay, we are
10, 9, 8. You have ignition.
Yeah, so I think we are good right now. Let me just give you formal introductions. Hare Krishna, everyone. Those who are joining by Zoom or in Facebook, we have very fortunate to have His Grace Akunath Prabhu on this seminar today for this Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 2, Chapter 8, continuations of our reading as well as delivering this seminar. So thank you for joining. So I will hand it over to Akunath Prabhu. So let me stop sharing in the meantime, and then we can stop share. Yes, Prabhu, you can please start with the kirtan and then.
Okay, let's just chant Jai Radha Madhava very briefly before we start. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I want to thank Bali Mardana Prabhu for organizing this series of lectures on the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And the second canto, of course, is very important. The Canto 1 and 2 are described as the two lotus feet of the Lord. The whole Srimad Bhagavatam is a literary incarnation of Krishna. And first and second canto are his two lotus feet. So when we're meditating on the Lord or viewing the deities, we start at the lotus feet. And it's recommended that we stay focused on the lotus feet for a long time. And that by meditating on the Lord's lotus feet, it can destroy mountains of sins. And the first two cantos are really sort of a self-contained mini Bhagavatam in the beginning. Canto 1, we have even the first verse is like a thesis statement that's a Mangala Charanam that not only invokes auspiciousness, but describes the subject matter of the work. And actually the first 3 verses, the first 3 chapters, the first 6 chapters, the whole first canto really introduces the whole Srimad Bhagavatam and sets the setting of the sages asking Sutta Goswami these questions, and Sutta Goswami explaining about the importance of the Bhagavatam and about how King Parikshit came to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam from Shukadeva Goswami. And so Canto 2 starts Shukadeva Goswami giving the instructions. King Parikshit had inquired about the duty of a human being, and especially one who's about to die. He had been cursed by a Brahmin boy to die within 7 days, and he decided to detach himself from all his material affairs and prepare to die by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam from Shukadeva Goswami. And this hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam was very pleasing to him, and he was very eager to hear more and more. So in the first few chapters, Shukadeva Goswami encouraged him, clarified his questions, and began describing the first step of God realization, how one should become detached from matter, should go to a secluded place, should meditate on the Lord. And Maharaj asked him, Parikshit Maharaj asked him about how to meditate, and he first described the meditation on the universal form, which is the beginning stage for someone who's still too attached to matter to actually meditate on the Lord's transcendental form. And he describes the Paramatma in the heart. He describes, let's see, he describes pure devotional service, the worship of different demigods, and the recommendation Tivrena Bhakti Yogena. And then Shaunaka Rishi, we go back to Naimisharanya, where Shaunaka Rishi said, what did King Parikshit ask next? Actually, King Parikshit was the perfect student. He was always asking questions. He was very inquisitive. He had met Lord Krishna within the womb when that's described in the first canto, how Ashwatthama tried to kill him to wipe out the line of the Pandavas by killing the Arjuna's grandson after he had already killed Draupadi's sons by a sneak attack at night, which was against all codes of chivalry and was a horrible crime. Then he tried to kill King Parikshit, but Krishna intervened. Krishna entered the womb of his mother and stopped the Brahmastra, and King Parikshit at that time got to have darshan, intimate darshan of Lord Krishna while he was still a fetus in the womb. And so all his life he was a devotee of Krishna. He played with dolls of Krishna. He always saw the deities being worshipped, and he was a great emperor. That's described in the first canto. Pariksha means inquiry. Like, I think in Hindi, if a teacher takes your examination, they take your pariksha. Am I right about that? I don't know. But pariksha means the inquirer, and he's inquiring. So in the chapters of 5, 6, and 7, so in chapter 4, King Parikshit inquires about the creation of the universe and of the phenomenal universes by Bhagavan, and how he also winds the universes up again, and how there's something mysterious about the Lord, that he's the Lord of all the energies. He manipulates the energies of the world, and yet he's not touched by material energy. He's aloof. So he asks about this mystery of the process of creation and the Lord's relationship to his creative energy. And Shukadev Goswami begins to answer by offering prayers, so that the Lord will be pleased on him, so he'll be able to speak correctly. And he begins speaking about how Lord Brahma answered the questions of his son Narada Muni. So he's emphasizing this Guru Parampara system, that the authoritative answers to these questions are found by going to how these questions were answered previously. And the thing is, this asking of questions and answers, even in the first canto in chapter 2, Sutra Goswami congratulates the sages headed by Shonaka, saying, Munayak sadhu krishtoham bhavabhir loka mangalam yat kritak krishna samprashno yanatma suprasiditi. That these are very relevant questions. And Srila Prabhupada writes, questions about Krishna are all auspicious for the whole world, and they fully satisfy. Only questions of this sort can satisfy this self. So Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport that the world is going on by questions and answers. The students are asking questions and the professors are answering in school. The press agents and journalists are answering questions and answers. The businessmen are all asking questions and answers. He even describes how the birds in the morning are out there chirping questions and answers. And the whole world is going on, but most of the questions and answers are about sense gratification. Where can I get food? Where can I get money? How can we make a deal? How can we make a political arrangement that will make us peaceful and prosperous? But they're not about Krishna. But the questions and answers about Krishna and his devotional service and his pure devotional service are particularly answered in Srimad Bhagavatam, and that by regularly and seriously inquiring and hearing the narrations of Srimad Bhagavatam from an authorized source, from a realized spiritual master, very quickly destroys all that's inauspicious in the heart, and one can become then fixed, freed from the anarthas, freed from the effects of passion and ignorance, and then is situated in the mode of goodness. One becomes very joyful, and in association with the Supreme Lord, one then becomes fully acquainted with the science of Krishna and becomes completely free from the chain of birth and death, of karma, and the reactions to previous works. So this hearing and chanting process is very important. These are the first 2 limbs that are described in the 9 limbs of Bhakti, Shravanam and Kirtanam, and they're very, very important. And Lord Chaitanya emphasized the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra as the divine method for deliverance in this age of Kali, that Hare Nama Eva Kevalam Kalo Nastyeva 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 Gatiranyata. So it's the only way to actually deliver us, because in this age there are so many faults. Kaler Doshanidhe Rajan Astihe Kad Mahadgunan Kirtanadeva Krishnasya Mukta Sangha Parangrajet. So this hearing and chanting, actually when Shukadeva Goswami was describing how Brahma answered the questions that Narada had asked, and those we've just been hearing in the last few lectures about the creation, the universal form, and about the scheduled incarnations. At the end of those instructions to Narada by Lord Brahma says that I got a summary of this Srimad Bhagavatam directly from Lord Krishna, and now you, Narada Muni, you go expand that. You go, convince people all over the world and unpack the summary and And again, that by hearing and appreciating regularly and describing with respect and devotion, then one is sure to get out of the illusory energy. So this is our process. The Bhagavatam Marg is really the process of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam again and again, including the holy names of Krishna. But this wonderful Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the greatest literature in the world, it's a literary incarnation of God. You know, people are apt to be interested in some kind of sensationalist novels or other kinds of literatures with, you know, or fantastic ideas and things. But Srimad Bhagavatam describes those literatures which don't describe Krishna as like places of pilgrimage for crows. Narada Muni explains that in the first canto when he's convincing Vyasadeva of the importance of actually compiling Srimad Bhagavatam, of actually composing this great Vedic literature, which is the ripened fruit of the desire tree of all the Vedas. And this Srimad Bhagavatam, just like Narada Muni was given the task to expand on the Bhagavatam and explain it, so it's the duty of all Vaishnava devotees to become qualified to explain the Srimad Bhagavatam. First, we have to hear it very well. We have to hear it very seriously and with great devotion and attention. And that hearing will please our spiritual master and will make us able to explain the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we'll be able to first Shravanam, then Kirtanam. You can explain what you've heard, directly what you've heard, following the footsteps of Shukadeva Goswami. He's not saying, oh, I just had some new thought or new idea. He wasn't trying to become famous as a novel sage who has a different theory, but he was explaining, this is exactly what I heard from my father, Vyasadeva, and from Krishna. He heard from Krishna, but I'm explaining what Brahma told Narada, and so now he's going to explain. So I thought we would start with in chapter 8, after we've heard the conclusion of Lord Brahma's descriptions to Narada Muni and his instruction to go out and expand on the Srimad Bhagavatam, then King Parikshit Maharaj started asking more questions. And he really asks, in this chapter 8, he really asks a large number of questions. You can probably count at least 28 to 30 questions. If some of the verses have several questions in them, and then some of the verses are where he asks a question and then he praises the process of hearing and listening to the answers of these questions, and how nice it is that he's hearing from Shukadeva Goswami. He's fasting, he's not sleeping, but he doesn't feel any fatigue. He doesn't feel any need for drink or food because Shukadeva Goswami's instructions are so beautiful, because they're the direct incarnation of Krishna. So I thought we would read from text number 5 of this chapter before we go into all the questions. And this is just a text that very beautifully praises the effects of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. So, Pali Mardan Prabhu, can you put that up on the screen somehow? Or
yes, Roji, let me get into the screen.
285. I'll go ahead and start reciting it because I don't think we can hear everybody else. I'll just recite it and then read the purport and translation. Pravishta karna rantrena svanam bhava shuroruham tunoti shamalam krishna salilasya yatha sharat pravishta karna rantrena svanam bhava suroruham tunoti shamalam krishna salilasya yatha sharat pravishta karna rantrena svanam bhava suroruham tunoti shamalam krishna salilasya yatha sharat. So let me just go through the word for word, pravishtaha, thus being entered, karna randrena, through the holes of the ears, svanam, according to one's liberated position, bhava, constitutional relationship, saraha, ruham, the lotus flower, dhunoti, cleanses, shamalam, material qualities like lust, anger, avarice, and hankering, krishnaha, Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, salilasya, of the reservoir of waters, yata, as it were, sharat, the autumn season. Translation: the sound incarnation of Lord Krishna, the Supreme Soul, that is Srimad Bhagavatam, enters into the heart of a self-realized devotee, sits on the lotus flower of his loving relationship, and thus cleanses the dust of material association, such as lust, anger, and hankering. Thus it acts like autumnal rains upon the pools of muddy water. This is Parishit Maharaj. He's asking questions, and then he's praising the process of this asking questions and hearing the authorized answers through disciplic succession. Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. It is said that a single pure devotee of the Lord can deliver all the fallen souls of the world. Thus, one who is actually in the confidence of a pure devotee like Narada or Shukadeva Goswami, and is thus empowered by one spiritual master, as Narada was by Brahmaji, can not only deliver himself from the clutches of Maya or illusion, but can deliver the whole world by his pure, empowered devotional strength. The comparison to the autumnal rain that falls on muddy reservoirs of water is very appropriate. During the rainy season, all the waters of the rivers become muddy, and in the month of July, August, the autumn season, when there is a slight rainfall, the muddy waters of the rivers all over the world become at once clear. By addition of some chemical, a small reservoir of water, like that of a metropolitan waterworks tank, can be cleared, but by such a tiny effort, it is not possible to clear up all the reservoirs of water like the rivers. A powerful, pure devotee of the Lord, however, can deliver not only his personal self, but also many others in his association. In other words, the cleansing of the polluted heart by other methods like the culture of empiric knowledge or mystic gymnastics can simply cleanse one's own heart, but devotional service to the Lord is so powerful that it can cleanse the hearts of the people in general by devotional service of the pure, empowered devotee. A true representative of the Lord, like Narada, Shukadeva Goswami, Lord Chaitanya, the 6 Goswamis, and later Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, etc., can deliver all people by their empowered devotional service. By sincere efforts to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, one realizes his constitutional relationship with the Lord in the transcendental humor of servitude, friendship, paternal affection, or conjugal love. And by such self-realization, one becomes situated at once in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Not only were all the pure devotees like Narada self-realized souls, but they were engaged in preaching work automatically by spiritual impetus, and thus they delivered many poor souls entangled in the material modes. They become so powerful because they sincerely followed the Bhagavatam principles by regular hearing and worshiping. By such actions, the accumulated material lusts, etc., become cleansed by the personal endeavor of the Lord within the heart. The Lord is always within the heart of the living being, but he becomes manifested by one's devotional service. Purification of the heart by culture of knowledge or mystic yoga may be all right for the time being for an individual person, but it is like the cleansing of a small quantity of stagnant water by chemical processes. Such clarification of water may stand for the time being when the sediments settle down, but by a slight agitation, everything becomes muddy. The idea is that devotional service to the Lord is the only method of cleansing the heart for good. Whereas other methods may be superficially good for the time being, there is a risk of becoming muddy again due to the agitation of the mind. Devotional service to the Lord with specific attention for hearing Srimad Bhagavatam regularly and always is the best recommended method for liberation from the clutches of illusion. Om Jnanatimurandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitanena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Sri Guru, Sri Yutapada Kamalam, Sri Gurun Vaishnavangscha, Sri Rupang Sagrajatam Sahagana, Raghunathan Vitang Tang Sajivam, Sadvaitam Savatutam, Parijana Sahitam, Krishna Chaitanya Devam, Sri Radha Krishna Padan, Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakhan Vitang Cha. Hey Krishna, Karuna Sindho, Dinabandho Jagapate, Gopesha Gopika Kanta, Radha Kanta Namostute, Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi, Radhe Brindavaneshwari, Vrishabhanu Sute Devi, Pranamami Hari Priye, Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale, Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Namine, Namaste Saraswati Devi, Gauravani Pracharine, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. When I was reading this purport, I was thinking of how incredibly powerful Srila Prabhupada and his preaching are, how he's distributing this Srimad Bhagavatam all over the world. And yet somehow still the world hasn't completely taken it up. You know, there should be courses in every university about Srimad Bhagavatam. Really, it should be, it's the central, it's the work of literature that explains that by itself is the process of attaining the highest perfection, the highest goal of life, just by studying it, hearing it seriously, and purifying one's heart. When Lord Krishna appears in the heart and cleanses away everything, once the Lord becomes fixed in one's heart, then the devotee never gives up desiring that association and constantly hears. So the method for attaining that situation is the same as the ultimate achievement, which is that one should regularly hear. Nityam Bhagavata Sevayam. One should hear it always, but if one hears every day, like Srila Prabhupada gave us a fixed hour Srimad Bhagavatam class every morning and 1 hour Srimad Bhagavad Gita class every evening, then by keeping that regular practice up, then one is also eternally hearing. And the more, when we get done from our duties in the day, then we can fix our mind on Krishna by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, just like we're discussing in this class. So Parikshit Maharaj was experiencing directly how purifying it was to listen to the Srimad Bhagavatam. Of course, he was a pure devotee all his life, and he was the perfect person to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam. But he sets the example of being submissive, being devoted to his spiritual master, and hearing from his spiritual master, who's also the highly qualified Shukadeva Goswami, who never concocts any ideas, but is repeating what he's heard and assimilated from his spiritual master. And so Sutta Goswami is doing the same thing. And we see the whole Srimad Bhagavatam is full of these questions and answers. Now in this chapter 8, this second chapter, like I said, first and second are like the two lotus feet. And in the second canto is what I mean to say. The second canto sort of sets the stage for the remaining 10 cantos. And these questions by Shukadeva Goswami here are so thorough, and they're a very long set of questions. And I made a little note of some of the questions that he asked, and I'll just try to read them quickly, but it'll take a long time. But King Parikshit asked Shukadeva Goswami, how did Narada Muni explain the Bhagavatam after Lord Brahma told him to explain the Bhagavatam? Then he glorifies in the next several verses this process of hearing and chanting. He says, I want to leave my body hearing about the Lord. And those who regularly and very seriously hear will have Krishna manifested in their hearts in a very short time. And then the verse we just read, and then one never relinquishes the lotus feet of the Lord, is the next verse. It's the previous verse, I think. Next verse, verse 6. A pure devotee of the Lord, whose heart has once become cleansed by the process of devotional service, never relinquishes the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, for they fully satisfy him, as a traveler is satisfied at home after a troubled journey. Or after we get past the stage of cleansing or clearing all the anarthas, then we become fixed and we develop a very strong taste. And then we can't ever give up thinking of Krishna, and we no longer become interested in material sense engagement. When I read this verse, text 5, it put me in mind of Srila Prabhupada's prayers about preaching in the West that he wrote in 1965, Markini Bhagavata Dharma. And he talks about this process from the first canto, second chapter. And, but he's praying for the Lord for power. He's saying, I don't have qualifications. How will these people in this horrible place understand the message of you, my Lord? But if you want them to, you can make them do it. And I'm ready to just dance as you like, as a puppet in your hands, but I want you, Srila Prabhupada is praying, I want you to liberate them. I want you to get them to understand this Krishna consciousness. By your will, you're allowing them to remain in ignorance, but now please, by your will, you can liberate them. So he makes these beautiful prayers. And when I read this purport, I just thought of the power of Srila Prabhupada, how this whole Hare Krishna movement, ISKCON, and even other offshoot organizations, Gaudiya Vaishnava organizations, are all created by this one sadhu coming and sitting in the park and with his kartals and chanting. And then this all came about, and he was so expert and constantly, because he had the symptoms of a person in devotional ecstasy. One of those symptoms is that he's very determined, doesn't waste any time, and we can see how Srila Prabhupada was very attached to hearing and chanting about Krishna. I read somewhere, I think it was in one Srutakirti's book, What is the Difficulty, or it might have been in another book, maybe Hari Sari's book, but one of Srila Prabhupada's servants was given the task that Srila Prabhupada needs to take some rest at night, and people would come to see him constantly way until late into the night, and he was supposed to chase them away, but Srila Prabhupada would hear their voice outside the door while the servant was chasing him away and said, no, let him come in. Prabhupada wanted to continue discussing Krishna constantly. This was Prabhupada's great mood, and he wanted to continue his service to his spiritual master of explaining the Srimad Bhagavatam, explaining Krishna consciousness to his students and to anyone who would hear. And it's our duty that he's given to all of his followers to, get the world to stand up and take notice of what is Srimad Bhagavatam, what is Chaitanya Charitamrita, who is Lord Chaitanya, who are the six Goswamis, what is this fabulous movement that most people are still not qualified because they're covered by modes of nature and so forth. They don't have the adhikara to become attracted to, and it's our duty, because we become at least a little attracted, it's our duty to explain these things. So Shukadev Goswami asks, how does a pure spirit soul acquire a material body? What's the cause, or is it just an accident? He asks if the Lord's gigantic body, which Lord Brahma described, the Virat Rupa and everything, he asks if that's like the body of a common being. He asks about the Lord in the heart, who's the Lord of all energies, and yet is untouched by his external energy. He asks, what's the actual position of the different planets? He's heard about how they're situated in the universal form. He wants to know how they're actually situated. And he asks about time. What's the scope of the entire universe? What's the scope of the subsidiary creations? Because there's partial annihilations. And what's the nature of time itself? And what's the duration of the life of different kinds of living beings? Some of them live a long time, some of them live a shorter time, and there's this concept of relative versus absolute time that's explained in the third canto now. What are the causes of different durations of time? How does gunas, the three modes, and karma work to promote or degrade living entities? How are the different material places created? The planets, the directions, the mountains, the sky, the rivers, and the different inhabitants of those places. He asks about the character and activities of great souls, and the specific divisions of the inner and outer space, and the characteristics of the different varnas and ashramas, and the different ages of history, and their divisions, and their durations, and the activities of the Lord's incarnations in those different ages. He asks, but he's really asking a lot of questions right now. He's becoming, you can imagine how he's become so enthusiastic, almost ecstatic, hearing from Shukadeva Goswami about self-realization and knowing that he's hearing from an authorized source who can answer all his questions. He becomes very, very inquisitive. And Srila Prabhupada explains that this is a qualification for a disciple to be very inquisitive and ask relevant questions. He asks about common religious affiliations. What is the universal religion of devotional service as distinguished from the various affiliations due to cultural circumstances and social, various occupational duties of social and royal orders of those, and particularly a religion of those in distress. But Srila Prabhupada in the purport explains that the real common one religion for all mankind is devotional service to Krishna. But how are they related? Sometimes people become discouraged when they see there's so many different religious organizations and religious teachings in the world, different rituals and so forth. And one thinks, well, they can't all be right, so maybe none of them are right. But Srila Prabhupada is saying, and Shukadeva Goswami is going to answer about how it's all related. Just like Arjuna asks about people in the 17th chapter, about people who don't follow the actual injunctions of scriptures and what is their faith in goodness, passion, or ignorance, and so forth. Parikshit Maharaj asks about the opulence of the mystics and how do they detach themselves from the subtle body. We know that the subtle body detaches from the gross body at death, but how do they become detached from the astral body, Srila Prabhupada calls it. And he asks about basic knowledge of the Vedic literature and how are the living beings generated? How are they maintained? How are they destroyed? What are the pros and cons of devotional service? What are the Vedic rituals and processes for dharma and artha and kama, the purusharthas in life? How are those who become merged in the Lord's body after annihilation again get created? How do the infidels, the demons, arise? And what about those who are eternally liberated in the spiritual energy? What is their life like? He asks about how the Lord enjoys his pastimes, displays his enjoyable pastimes in this manifested lila, and then he gives them up. And while the world is annihilated, and then but yet he remains as the witness. So he's asking about this. It's a little mysterious how Krishna is enjoying pastimes in this world, but he's also internally enjoying pastimes, internally witnessing everything, even though he appears to depart the world. And then he asks a very interesting question. He says, answer all the questions I've asked, and also answer all the questions I haven't thought of asking. Answer the questions that I may not have asked, because I'm your disciple, I'm surrendered to you, and I please want you to explain everything to me. Just like in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, I'm going to explain both the phenomenal and the noumenal, and knowing which there's nothing further. So King Parikshit is saying, just explain everything to me, O Shukadeva Goswami. And then at the end of this chapter, Shukadeva Goswami begins narrating by explaining how, again, referring to the disciplic succession, he's explaining how the Lord first explained the science directly to Lord Brahma. So before we talked about chapter 5, I think it was, or whatever, or the end of chapter 7, Lord Brahma said, Krishna originally gave me the Srimad Bhagavatam in summary. Now, Narada Muni, I want you to go and expand it. So now this chapter ends with Shukadeva Goswami beginning to ask these questions, beginning to answer these questions, and starting by explaining how and when the Lord explained it to Lord Brahma in its summary form. And Srila Prabhupada says in the purport that the spiritual master will explain everything. Shukadeva Goswami is going to explain everything. He doesn't have to explain it exactly in the order the questions were placed. Let me see, it's a short purport. It says, Shukadeva also prepared himself to reply to all that King Parikshit had inquired from him. Maharaj Parikshit was the best in the dynasty of the Pandus, and thus he was able to ask the right questions from the right person. So it's the duty of the disciple to ask questions from the spiritual master and get from the spiritual master an understanding, a realization. Sometimes the realization is being described, just like Srila Prabhupada was praying and marking in Bhagavata Dharma, that may I be able to make my words able to explain them so that the people will understand it. That realization means that you've heard the subject matter and you can explain the same conclusion in a way that's just suitable for the particular audience who's inquiring. And so Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, Maharaj Parikshit asked many questions, some of them very curiously, to know things as they are. But it is not necessary for the master to answer them in the order of the disciples' inquiries, one after the other. But Shukadeva Goswami, experienced teacher that he was, answered all the questions in a systematic way as they were received from the chain of disciplic succession. He answered all of them without exception. So, Hare Krishna. It's we have like 20 minutes for questions and answers, and we can discuss a lot of things. And I can go on talking, but who has some questions?
Yes, Prabhuji, thank you very much. So we have a lot of people around in the Facebook. They join and listening from their home. So they are asking Dilip Bhai Patel, our Prabhu saying, Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranam to you.
Hare Bol Dilip Bhai.
And Bimala Mishra, she's Ananda's cousin from Singapore. She's also saying Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna to you all. Now let's get some questions.
Yeah, so one thing is...
Rishi Maharaj asked so many questions, so we need to have us ask questions.
So the first one, which is from Usha Saini, is out of curiosity, why color of both Rama and Krishna is black?
Why the color of Krishna and Brahma is black?
Yes.
I never heard that Brahma was black, but I mean...
Not Brahma, Rama.
Oh, Ram.
Yeah.
Ram and Krishna is black. It's interesting because Rama is described in Valmiki Ramayana as Shama. But in our iconography, the South Indian iconography, which is also Bengali, Orissa, Bengal, Lord Brahma is presented as green, not bluish, dark bluish like Krishna. Although in North India, we see the paintings of Lord Rama as the same color as Krishna, dark, like bluish. But why is he the color? He can be whatever color he chooses to be, of course. And he appears in a particular form also to please the pure devotees who want to see him in a particular way. So there's a difference of mood in Lord Rama and Lord Krishna. But as far as why he's black, Bhaktisiddhanta answers it this way about Krishna's achintya guna swarupam. Achintya, I don't remember exactly the verse from Srimad Sri Brahma Samhita, Yang Shama Sundara Machintam, Premanjana Churita, Bhakti Vilochanena,
Santa Sadeva
Sadaiva
Hridayeshwar.
Hridayanti Vilokayanti, Yang Shama Sundara Machincha Gunaswarupam. So Shama Sundara, it includes that word Shama, the color of the swarthi, the dark color. And Krishna is described as like a monsoon cloud or like a tamal tree. But he says it's not a material color. We can't see it. We see Krishna only with spiritual eyes. I'm not directly answering your question, but I guess what I'm saying is there's not some pat answer like, because the sky is blue, or because blue is the color of peacefulness, or those kind of answers are not given by our acharyas. But Bhaktisiddhanta is giving the answer that the color of Krishna is something that can be perceived only with transcendental senses. It's an inconceivable color. Krishna has qualities. The Mayavadi philosophers are always misinterpreting Srimad Bhagavatam because they can't understand that the absolute truth has his personal feature, which is actually Bhagavan is actually the last word in realization of the absolute truth. And they can't understand it, and they're always denying qualities because they think qualities are material, that any qualities are material. But actually, Krishna's qualities, including his color, his blackish hair, he's known as Keshava, he plays a flute, he sports his different pastimes like playing with the cowherd boys or meeting the gopis. These are all what the Srimad Bhagavatam is full of. It's full of authorized descriptions by those who are qualified by their bhakti, by their love, by their prema, premanjana churita bhakti vilochanena. When the eyes are smeared with the salve of prema, Krishna prema, then they can see Krishna and they can explain it. But I'm sorry, I don't have a pat answer for you,
No, it was good, Prabhuji. So
Okay.
I will ask if anyone in the Zoom, please unmute yourself and ask the questions directly. Please unmute. You should be able to talk.
So sometime when people ask questions like that, and I don't mean to belittle the question, we're encouraging people to be curious, but sometimes when we would ask questions like that to Srila Prabhupada, that particular question, why is Krishna blue, is one of the questions. And Srila Prabhupada, I didn't hear personally, I don't think I ever heard it on the recording, but in our ISKCON, sort of history of Prabhupada said that someone asked Prabhupada, why is Krishna blue? And Prabhupada said, the real question is, why can't you ask him why he's blue? In other words, that these kind of questions, so devotees are required to ask questions, and then the questions should be relevant to how they can make progress in actual devotional service, and being able to meditate on Krishna and be able to actually personally talk to Krishna eventually. And so he says that in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there's the famous verse that we can try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquiring submissively and rendering service. And Srila Prabhupada says in this verse, both absurd inquiry and blind following are condemned, by which he means that we should be curious. We should try to clear our doubts. It's the duty of the disciple to be very curious and to ask pertinent questions about how to make advancement and how to overcome problems and in devotional service, and also how to understand Krishna and understand not just his. Srila Prabhupada is often in this 2nd canto, he's often mentioning how, some people, they go to professional reciters and they want to hear about Krishna's pastimes in a way that they enjoy it, but they're not really actually hearing it in the mood of how they're serving Krishna by hearing. And so we're supposed to ask questions in this mood of Parikshit Maharaj. He's giving the example, or Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita is giving the example how these questions should be asked. But the goal should be to really understand Krishna and really understand devotional service and how we can actually achieve it. And so Prabhupada would say to questions like, why is Krishna blue? If someone was looking for some kind of pat or cheap answer, and he would say, this isn't the right approach. It should be, and I don't mean to belittle the question at all, but it should be.
One more, let me read it. Ruby Mataji is saying, Ruby Mukherjee.
Haribol.
Thank you, Prabhu, for today's class. Reminds me of the first time I took a Bhagavatam class from you in the old temple. Pranams from Ruby.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, I'm sorry I haven't seen you all a lot lately since I moved up to Oakland, and then now we've been stay at home, and but I miss you all too, and I miss being at ISB.
Yeah, so in the Zoom, please unmute yourself and definitely directly ask the question. But Facebook, I'm reading those people who are not able to. So my question, one of them is coming, why is Srimad Bhagavatam is also considered as a person? I mean, how do you know that Bhagavatam is also a person? Just like holy name is a person, flute is a person. So how can we know and what exactly a person means and how do we deal with that?
Well, we hear from Sutta Goswami, he's explaining all the incarnations of Krishna, and then he says, Idam Bhagavatam Namam Puranam. How's the verse? There's a couple of verses in the 3rd chapter. But Idam Bhagavatam Nama Puranam Brahmasammitam Uttama Charitam Chikara Bhagavan Rishi Rishasayanas Nishriyasaya Lokasya Danyam Swastayanan Mahat. What's the other verse? That it's brilliant as the sun and it has appeared.
The one Krishna Sadhama Pagate.
Krishna Swadhama Pagate Dharma Jnana Dibisaha. Thank you. That after Krishna, the sages asked Sutta Goswami, where is Krishna gone? Now that, where will people be able to, find spiritual life in this Kali Yuga, now that Krishna has left along with all the good qualities like Dharma and Jnana. And then Sutta Goswami says that now that Krishna has returned to his abode, that this Srimad Bhagavatam is a literary incarnation of Krishna. Krishna Swadharma Upagate.
Yeah. Krishna Sadhama
Dharma Jnana Dibisaha. Kalo Nastra Dishamesha Purana Arko Telodita. That people will find light in this age of Kali from this Purana. So that's actually been explained by the Acharyas and by, in the Srimad Bhagavatam itself. So now how can we understand that a book is a person? Normally a book isn't a person, right? Normally in material experience, a name isn't a person, a book isn't a person, they're just material things. But we can actually have direct experience when we study Srimad Bhagavatam, when we hear Srimad Bhagavatam, that we have a relationship with it. That our hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam, literally changes and due to our mood and due to what we're thinking about, and that Krishna it's always fresh, and Krishna is always giving us fresh insights when we hear Srimad Bhagavatam. So it's not like an ordinary literature. Krishna was given the benediction from his guru Sandipani Muni that he would, whatever he said would always be fresh and would never be stale.
So some additional questions are also coming in between, Prabhuji. So one is from Sunil Saval Prabhu, Hare Krishna. I don't know him, but is Bhagavatam only Mahapuran?
Well, Bhagavatam is considered the Amala Purana, the highest authority by Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya has told us this. So of course there are 18 Mahapuranas. 6 of them are for persons in the mode of goodness, 6 of them for persons in the mode of passion, and 6 for persons in the mode of ignorance. And they give prescriptions, different things that people should do, and vrats, and they tell stories of different pastimes of Vishnu and of demigods and so forth. that are good for hearing for those different people. Srimad Bhagavatam itself is Nirmatsaranam Satam. Vedyam Vastavamatra Vastu Shabad. What's the verse? Dharmat Projita Kaitavotra Parama Nirmatsaranam Satam. So Vedyam, this is second verse. Vedyam Vastavamatra Vastu Shivadam Tapatrayam Mulanam Idam Bhagavatam. Anyway, I'm forgetful right now. I'm rusty. But these are famous verses, but they're saying that the Srimad Bhagavatam is especially for the Paramahamsas. It's really made for people who have given up, like Shukadev Goswami. Before he heard Bhagavatam, he had given up all. He was a king, but he gave up all his attachment to his kingdom, to his family, his children, everything, and got prepared to die. And that this is the proper way to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. Of course, we might not be on that level, but by hearing is the way we can get on that level. And it's so, yeah, it's the best of all the 18 Mahapuranas. There's also local Puranas, different places of pilgrimage have their own histories of what happened at that spot and stuff. They're smaller Puranas, but these 18 Mahapuranas, this is described in chapter 10. So we finished chapter 8 today, and we hear about chapter 9 when Lord Krishna spoke the Bhagavatam in summary to Lord Brahma, when Lord Krishna spoke in summary to Lord Brahma. And then in chapter 10, the title Srila Prabhupada gives it is that Srimad Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. And it describes how every Mahapurana has to have touch on these various different subject matters, including the Srimad Bhagavatam. And so the answers to the questions that we've been hearing about today will be elaborated on in great detail throughout the next 10 cantos. So it is one of the Mahapuranas, and it does have these different subject matters like creation, the process of creation, the secondary process of creation, the annihilation, the dynasties of different kings, and the activities of great devotees, and the different descriptions of things that are expected in a Mahapurana. I don't know if that was what the question was directed to.
Yeah, I saw. Hare Krishna, Dandavad Pranam. Yes, that's the response. And thank you for it.
Before you ask the next question, I just wanted to say that even the scholars, even the mundane scholars, if you go to the Indian studies, area studies at Berkeley and stuff, they'll say that Srimad Bhagavatam is uniquely well structured. And I wanted to say that I might not have mentioned it before. I took a class in the Vrindavan Institute of Higher Education, and Brajabihari was the teacher. And one of the things that he imparted to us was that when we read Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, we get the actual instruction, the beautiful description in the particular verse we're reading, and the particular description of Krishna or whatever it is that's in the verse. We should also understand the arc of the story that's being told in the verse. We should also understand what that story is illustrating in response to a larger question that's going on in the verse. And we should also understand how it all fits into the beautiful structure of the whole Srimad Bhagavatam. Maybe he didn't say that one, but I had a professor in college in a history class that used to tell us how to read a book. We would read the book, we had to understand what the thesis was, we had to understand what the evidence was to prove the thesis, and he would actually have us go through the table of contents and group the chapters, what an introduction is and so forth. And these things, even though he's a mundane professor, these things hold true for studying Srimad Bhagavatam. Even though studying Bhagavatam is not an intellectual process like studying a history book, it's really hearing and associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's still useful to, the Bhagavatam is for very advanced philosophers and scholars that can understand that. So what I was saying is that even people who may not be gifted by bhakti with the ability to enter into the spiritual and mystical understanding of Srimad Bhagavatam, they recognize that even among the great Puranas like Vishnu Purana, Padma Purana, and so forth. That Srimad Bhagavatam is a very beautifully organized treatise on Krishna. So I'm sorry. Now your next question. I interrupted.
Yeah, I think so far no more questions in the one, just comments and all. Thank you. So I would like to say, because we are also about to time, I'd just like to share that regarding our Bhadra campaign from ISKCON of Silicon Valley, we already said and many times when we are also asking devotees to sponsor Bhagavatam. If you don't have a Bhagavatam, please connect me or Akunath Prabhu. We are going to ship you directly on ebook of Bhagavatam. There is an ebook also available. Please connect us. So please have a copy of Bhagavatam without any, hesitation.
Have a copy and also read it regularly.
Yeah.
I had one of Srila Prabhupada's god brothers, B.B. Puri Maharaj, came to my house one time, and he saw my set of Bhagavatams and Chaitanya Charitamritas, and he said how Swami Maharaj had gotten everyone to get all these books, but they just keep them in their house and they don't read them. So they, I don't know why. Maybe my books look too neat. Actually, a lot of them are threadbare now, and
Because you're keeping it so carefully, yeah.
But he said that we should be, regularly reading. That's the process that Parikshit Maharaj is describing here. That if we regularly read very seriously with devotion and attention, that this is the best method. That's much better than mystic yoga. And Srila Prabhupada was explaining the purport. That mystic yoga and philosophical speculation may be able to somewhat purify one person, but it won't empower them to purify others. And we need to become empowered it's our mission, it's our duty to Srila Prabhupada, if we have any gratitude, to become qualified to explain Bhagavatam and then to explain it to others and get other people to give it the recognition it deserves. The Srimad Bhagavatam like they have prizes for the Pulitzer Prize or this or that. Srimad Bhagavatam is this awesome literature that explains everything about Vedic literature, but explains the essence really, and it actually works. It's not just a book that you read to pass the time or to escape or to it's a book that you read that opens a whole new world to you, and that's the spiritual world, the world we really belong to, and it frees us from birth and death and the problems that we're suffering, as Hamlet says in the soliloquy, that we're the heartaches and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. We're suffering from these things. And the Srimad Bhagavatam is the real solution. Not killing yourself like the question that Hamlet was asking, to be or not to be. No, we have to be. We are. We're eternally. But we shouldn't be conditioned. We should be devotees, pure devotees of Krishna, relishers of Srimad Bhagavatam. And the world needs to know that.
Thank you, Prabhuji. And we have comment also in our Zoom chat, Hare Krishna from Urvashi Mataji. That's nice. So I would like to share one thing. This is Akunath Prabhuji's profile. He's from Disciple of Prabhupada, and he's a lawyer, and he's served in ISKCON of Silicon Valley, board of director. His analogy on Bhagavatam is amazing. And also would like to urge you that if you wanted to study, not only study, be a teacher for Bhakti Shastri and Bhakti Vaibhav program. I'm part of North America from ISKCON Ministry of Education managing. So please, you're most welcome to reach out to me if you are experienced, you have those real qualifications. I'll help you out. So there are many temples we are helping it out. So please don't hesitate. So you want to be a teacher and educator, so can join. And then the next week, if you see my screen, the next week, June 20th, Saturday, we'll have at 8 p.m. because Her Grace Vishakha Devi Dasi, she is based out in London. So we wanted to honor, so it will be very early our time. But the meeting, the Zoom call would be at 8 p.m. next Saturday, which will be 9th chapter of Canto 2. And Canto 2 has only 10 chapter, and June 27th, we are going to end. So we'd like to thank you, Akunath Prabhu, for joining today. And I would like everybody, those who are on the call, unmute yourself and please give a big round of, so we can chant everybody Hare Krishna. And then after that, we end the call.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Hare Krishna.
Oh, I hear my wife in the peanut gallery. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Okay. So
Hi,
thank
everyone.
you.
So
Okay,
thank you again, Balimardan. We should all become teachers. That's our job. We should all, as far as possible, hear the Srimad Bhagavatam and then become qualified to teach it.
Exactly. So hopefully everybody becomes the teacher. And thank you, everyone. Again, Hare Krishna. See you next Saturday, 8 p.m. Hare Bol.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.